My phone buzzed at 11:40 with a message that made my stomach drop before I even read the words. Delivery delayed. Unexpected interference. Remain at your location. I had spent 3 weeks waiting for a simple home helper robot, the kind that vacuums floors and reminds you to eat something other than cold cereal. And for the last 2 hours, the tracking map had shown it parked 10 minutes from my door without moving an inch. Rain hammered against my window. Somewhere down the street a dog would not stop barking, and I told myself it meant nothing. At 5 minutes past midnight, something struck my porch hard enough to rattle the doorframe. Then came knocking, fast and uneven, like whoever stood outside barely had the strength to lift their hand a fourth time. Delivery drones do not knock. They beep twice and leave a parcel on the mat. My hand was already on the lock before my brain finished telling me this was a bad idea. I opened the door and the porch light caught her standing there, soaked through and shaking, wrapped in torn silver packaging that still carried my order number printed across it. Her skin held a faint shimmer under the bulb, like oil resting on water, and her eyes were too large for her face, with flecks of silver where the color should have been. Pointed ears showed through wet hair pressed flat against her head. Behind her, on my front lawn, the delivery drone that should have carried my robot lay on its side, smoking gently, one rotor still spinning in slow, useless circles. I should have shut the door. Instead, I asked if she was hurt. She flinched at the sound of my voice like it had struck her, then said something built from clicks and soft, rolling vowels, a language my ears had never heard before. A small device clipped near her collar caught up half a second later, translating in a flat, mechanical tone. Help, please, not long now. I looked past her at the empty street, at the smoking drone, at the rain turning to mist under the porch light, and I made the kind of decision a person only gets to make once. I stepped aside and let her in. She collapsed onto my couch the moment the door closed, breathing hard, one hand pressed against her side. I grabbed a towel and the spare blanket from the hall closet, the one I kept for guests who never actually visited, and draped both over her shoulders without thinking too hard about what I was doing. Up close, the torn wrapping matched the courier company logo exactly, down to the small smiling box mascot, and a shipping label still clung to her arm with a serial number that did not match the one printed on my own order confirmation. Before I could ask her anything else, I remembered the drone still lying in plain sight on my front lawn, smoke curling lazily into the rain. Henry, the early riser 2 houses down, walked his dog past my porch most mornings before sunrise, and a smashed delivery drone in my yard was exactly the kind of thing that would have him knocking on my door with questions I had no answers for. I left Vay wrapped in the blanket, telling her to stay low and stay quiet, and slipped outside in my socks. The grass was freezing and the rain had not let up. I dragged the dead machine behind the hedge at the side of my house, where the shadows would hide it until I figured out what to do with it, then hurried back up the porch steps before my feet went numb. By the time I came back inside, soaked again and shivering, Vay was watching me with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between confusion and quiet gratitude. It took almost 20 minutes before her translator caught up enough for full sentences. Her name, as close as the device could shape it, was Vay. I told her mine in return, Ethan, and her translator repeated it back a moment later, careful and flat, like she was testing how the sound felt. Vay came from a transport convoy 3 systems away, one of many vessels moving goods and registered passengers along old trade routes. During a routine inspection, in the noise and confusion of cargo being sorted, she had slipped into a pod meant for outbound courier shipments. She had not picked Earth by accident. She had studied it for weeks before the inspection, waiting for the right moment. She explained that the convoy did not only haul crates and spare machine parts, it also moved registered beings between processing stations. People like her who had been catalogued so long ago that most no longer remembered a version of life before it. Once a designation was finalized at the next station, there would be no second chance to slip away, no gap left open for someone to climb through. The cargo pod bound for Earth's courier network had been her only real window, open for less than 4 minutes between 2 security sweeps, timed against patrol routes she had memorized for weeks. She had taken that window without knowing what waited on the other side, only that staying would have meant becoming permanent in a system she had never agreed to join. I asked why anyone would choose a planet that still ran on dial tones and traffic lights. She looked at me as though the answer should have been obvious. Because of the noise, she said. Every street on this world hummed with signals, routers, baby monitors, garage openers, refrigerators quietly chatting with phones that never stopped buzzing. To her people it was chaos, a constant storm that any sensible civilization would have cleaned up generations ago. But that storm was exactly why a clean, quiet tracker built for empty space could not isolate a single signal hiding inside it. Earth was not primitive to her. Earth was cover. For a moment I thought about reaching for my phone and calling for help, telling someone, anyone, that there was an injured stranger sitting on my couch. I even picked the phone up. Then I tried to imagine the sentence I would actually say out loud, and how fast someone would hang up on me, and I set it back down. That decision made itself for me a minute later. The streetlights outside flickered, all 4 on my block, in perfect sequence, like something massive had passed directly over the wires. Vey went rigid. The dog that had been barking earlier suddenly went silent, the kind of silence that feels louder than noise. I crossed to the window and looked through a gap in the curtain. Something moved low over the rooftops across the street, dark and nearly silent, a thin blue light sweeping the ground from its underside like a searchlight built from static. It paused over one neighbor's house, then mine, then drifted on, slow and patient, the way something hunts when it already believes its prey has nowhere left to go. "The ledger," Vey whispered, her translator catching the word a beat behind her. "They followed the pod's last signal. It will bring them close. Not exact. Close." I asked how long we had. "Not long," she said, and for the first time the flat translator could not quite hide how frightened she sounded underneath it. My first instinct was to kill every light in the apartment, unplug everything, go dark and silent, and hope we looked like nobody home. I had my hand on the router cord before Vey grabbed my wrist and shook her head hard. "Quiet was the mistake," she said. Quiet stood out. In a city built on endless electronic clutter, one dark, silent house was the single signal a tracker could actually separate from the noise. Hiding did not mean disappearing. It meant blending in completely. So I did the opposite of every instinct I had. I turned everything on. I moved through the apartment like someone possessed, flipping every switch, waking every device I owned. The microwave ran with nothing inside it. My old Bluetooth speaker hissed static from a playlist that had not worked in months. The baby monitor my sister Grace had left behind after visiting with my nephew buzzed to life on the kitchen counter. I dug an old radio kit out of the closet, a hobby I had abandoned 2 years earlier, switched it on, and let it scan static across every open frequency it could reach. Within minutes my small apartment hummed louder than half the street combined. Layer stacked on layer of useless, beautiful noise. Halfway through, the old radio kit sputtered and dimmed, its battery finally giving out after 2 years of sitting untouched in a closet. The static thinned for a few terrible seconds, just enough that I could hear my own heartbeat again over the quiet, before I remembered the spare power bank still charging on my kitchen counter from the night before. I ripped the cable free and jammed it into the radio with hands that were not quite steady, my fingers fumbling the connector twice before it finally clicked into place. The static roared back to life half a heartbeat later, filling the apartment again right as the searching shape outside dipped lower over my street, as if it had felt the gap and come looking for it. Outside, the searching shape slowed. Through the window I watched it hover directly above my street, the pale blue light sweeping faster now, flickering, struggling to pull one thin trace out of 1,000 competing signals. My phone, my smart bulbs, my neighbor's garage system, my own radio kit shouting nonsense into the dark, all of it folded together into a fog dense enough to swallow whatever faint trail the pod had left behind. Then came a knock at my front door, 3 slow, deliberate taps, nothing like the desperate knocking from before. My heart nearly stopped. Vey pulled the blanket tighter and pressed herself back into the corner of the couch, as far from the door as the small room allowed. I gave her a sharp gesture to stay low, grabbed the nearest object within reach, an empty pizza box from 2 nights earlier, and opened the door only a crack, holding it up like I had simply answered for a delivery I was expecting. A tall figure stood on my porch, wrapped in a dark coat that looked less like fabric and more like poured shadow, a narrow visor across its face glowing the same pale blue I had watched sweep the rooftops. It said nothing. It only raised a small device that hummed and blinked, scanning the doorway, scanning me, scanning the warm light spilling out behind me, thick with static and a dozen overlapping signals. I did the only thing I could think to do. I acted annoyed, the way anyone does when a stranger interrupts a late dinner, and asked if this was about the noise complaint, because my radio kit kept bleeding into next door's baby monitor again, and I was already arguing with the building manager about it. The device in its hand blinked twice, then let out a low, irritated whine, the sound of a machine giving up on finding one clean thread inside a thunderstorm. The figure lowered its scanner, turned without a word, and climbed back into the silent shape still hovering above the street. A moment later it lifted away, blue light fading into low cloud, and the road outside settled back into ordinary, rain-soaked silence. I shut the door and slid down against it until I was sitting on my own floor, pizza box still in my hand, my heart hammering loud enough to hear over the radio static still hissing from the kitchen. Vey did not move for almost a full minute. Then she let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, shaky and disbelieving, and her translator offered 4 quiet words. That should not work. I told her that on this planet, very little ever worked the way it was supposed to, and somehow we had built an entire civilization on top of that anyway. We sat together until the first gray light of morning crept through the curtains, and one by one I switched off the radio kit, the speaker, the monitor, letting the apartment settle back into its normal, comfortable hum. Vey explained more as the hours passed. The ledger cataloged every passenger and every cargo unit on every route under its control. She had been logged as inventory rather than treated as a person. Escape meant becoming a number nobody could trace, not a person anyone could rescue. She also told me she was probably not the only one who had chosen Earth's chaos as a hiding place, that other pods may have scattered to other cities, other countries, other ordinary front doors where someone equally unprepared had opened up in the middle of the night. I asked what she planned to do now. She looked around my small, cluttered apartment, at the dead pizza box still sitting in my hand, at the cooling drone still hidden behind my hedge outside, and said that for the first time since leaving her own system, she felt something close to safe. The robot maid I had ordered 3 weeks earlier never did arrive. The company later sent an apologetic message about a routing error and offered a full refund, which I accepted without ever explaining why a simple cleaning robot had somehow become the most important delivery of my life. I never did get my floors vacuumed that month. Instead, I got a quiet, careful houseguest who flinched at doorbells, found my coffee maker endlessly fascinating, and slowly began trusting the strange, noisy, chaotic species who had hidden her in plain sight without even realizing what we were doing. Henry started waving at her from across the street within a week, fully convinced she was some cousin visiting from somewhere far away, and Vey waved back every single time like it was the most important part of her entire day. We never did figure out a permanent answer for the broken drone behind my hedge. I ended up burying it deeper inside a storage bin in the garage, just in case the ledger ever sent someone to check old delivery routes a second time, months or years from now. Some nights, more out of habit than fear at this point, I still switched the old radio kit on before bed and let it hiss quietly into the dark, just in case another pod out there ever needs somewhere loud enough, messy enough, and human enough to disappear into. Sometimes I still think about that shape hovering over my rooftop, blue light sweeping through static it could never fully untangle, built to find quiet signals in clean, empty space, and never standing a chance against a planet that simply refused to be quiet. We are loud. We are messy. Every signal here talks over every other signal, all day, every day, and nobody ever thought it was worth fixing. Turns out that was the whole point.